gun violence.
Hi everyone, and welcome to the inaugural Winter Youth Activism Gala. We are extremely excited to have you all with us and eager to highlight the work that our 4 organizations have been putting in addition to explaining how you can help support the next generation of changemakers. Without further ado, I'll introduce the Master of Ceremonies, President and co-founder of the Greater Good Initiative, Adam Ashley. Take it away, Adam.
Thanks, Pranav, and thank you to everybody that's watching tonight. We're so incredibly grateful that you've chosen to spend your Tuesday evening with us to hear more about the work that we're doing in the youth advocacy and activism spaces. My name's Adam Ashley. I'm one of the co-founders of the Greater Good Initiative, one of the 4 amazing youth-led organizations that we're featuring here tonight. If you're joining us on our Give Butter event page, I do want to highlight in the top right corner the donation button. If you're at all interested in contributing financially to these 4 organizations, you can do so by clicking on that button in the top right corner of your screen. We've set up a couple of tiers, but you're able to donate as little or as much as you would like. Every dollar counts and helps us continue the work that we're doing. So we thank you so much for your donations. We're going to kick off this evening with a group discussion with some of the leaders from Generation Ratify, the Greater Good Initiative, Not My Generation, and Youth Over Guns. All right. Hi, everybody. I am here with some of the amazing youth leaders involved in the 4 amazing youth organizations that are featured here at tonight's gala. We're just going to ask them a couple questions, hear a little bit more about their organizations. So the first question I have for all of you is, what does youth advocacy mean to you? Yasmina, do you want to start that off?
To me, youth advocacy really means that the generation that's soon going to inherit our country gets to have a voice in the decisions being made in our government, as well as being able to fight for the society, economy, politics that they want to see, because their opinion matters too.
Yeah, to GGI and to me, I think youth advocacy really means empathy, right? Taking a deep understanding and compassion for the communities that we're serving, and not only serving, but amplifying and taking that amplification to understand that we as young people, we're not the leaders of tomorrow, we're the leaders of today. We have the power to move and shake and challenge the status quo around us, and that ability for us to unite together in pursuit of a common goal of justice, of equity, of empathy is what allows us to make movements of such mass mobilization and to write policy that's considered in our government. And I think all of that connects to really define the power of youth advocacy and why it's so one of a kind in this current era, in this current moment, how our power is so unmatched, and how we're able to really come together behind these goals and challenge what we've known.
Yeah, so to Not My Generation, youth advocacy doesn't only have a meaning, it has a specific power, similar to what Tarina was just saying. For us, youth advocacy really means being willing to challenge the status quo and to question the systems and structures that we know and that we've been raised in, because as young people, we see how these systems have failed us. We see how they failed our neighbors and our loved ones and our community members, and we're not afraid to step back and look at what we've been taught, what we think we know, and really question why things are the way they are and what's being centered, right? So it allows us to not only fight for the policies we believe in and to center what it is that's important to us, but also to take a step back and question why things are the way they are, to question why our economy is set up in the way it is, to question why some people are stuck at the top while some people are stuck at the bottom, to question why certain policies have stayed in place when they're not benefiting the average person. So youth advocacy, to me and to Not My Generation, is really about asking the tough questions, pursuing what's larger than ourselves, and being part of, exactly like what Tarina said, moving and shaking and building a world that we want to live in and that we want our future generations to live in.
Yeah, absolutely. So to me and to Youth Over Guns, like just echoing what Catherine said about building a new world, I think that young people have a unique ability to imagine and create outside of the confines that we're in. So we witness all this violence, but we are able to still dream that a future without this violence exists. And so I think that's what youth advocacy means. It's like when we combine our dreams that are tangible, like, adults like to tell us that, our dreams are not accessible, that they're just dreams. But young people, we have built a blueprint around those imaginations. And with that, our advocacy, we're able to create solutions and policies and movements that are completely surrounded by creativity and imagination. And that's why, all the successful movements that we've seen across the world have had young people at the front of it, whether that is against dictatorships, whether that is about gun violence prevention, whether that is about unjust laws. Young people have been at the front because they can imagine and see the finish line in ways that, adults, they just can't. And so, yeah, and I love that about young people. And that's why, youth advocacy is so essential to every single moment that we're in, because that's how we actually get to, the liberation that we're all looking for, and all the liberation that we know we can reach.
We're now going to transition to hear from the leaders of all of these organizations and learn more about exactly what their organization does. We're kicking this off with Generation Ratify. Generation Ratify is the youth-led advocacy movement focused on ratifying the Equal Rights Amendment in the United States. Take it away, guys.
Our rights are on the line.
In January of 2020, Virginia ratified the Equal Rights Amendment, making it the 38th and last necessary state in the U.S. to do so.
However, the Supreme Court and Congress are pushing back against the will of the people, refusing to extend the ratification deadline and blocking the ERA from entering the Constitution. That's where Generation Ratify comes in.
Generation Ratify is a youth-led movement to ratify the ERA.
First, we educate. We've led 2 mentorship programs, ERA Boot Camp and Equal Rights Cohort, that have trained over 120 young people across the country to organize for gender equality through legislative and electoral organizing.
Second, we advocate. In June of 2020, we co-wrote an amicus brief in the Supreme Court case Virginia v. Ferrero, providing youth-centered arguments for why the ERA should be ratified by the highest court in the land. This year, we hosted multiple lobby days, bringing hundreds of youth activists to Congress and advocating for important equal rights legislation.
Third, we elect. Despite the COVID-19 pandemic impacting the way we would campaign, we've made over 1 million voter contacts, both phone calls and text messages, for critical races. We've helped elect pro-ERA candidates across the board, from President Joe Biden to Senator Mark Kelly.
Finally, we empower. By uplifting the voices of young women identifying and non-binary folks of all racial and ethnic backgrounds, we are ensuring that this movement is equitable for all. With over 5,000 young people in nearly every state in the nation, our youth-led organization is pushing for gender equality on a massive scale.
We are Generation Ratify.
All right, we're going to kick off the question and answer portion with a question that I'm asking all of the organizations. So, how has Generation Ratify's activism and advocacy work changed because of the COVID-19 pandemic? What new platforms are you guys using to continue your work?
So COVID-19 hit Generation Ratify during a strange transitional period. We are moving from doing electoral organizing to getting more into legislative advocacy at the federal level. And it was also hitting us during a period of growth. We were having a lot of new people coming into our movement around that time. So we had to balance, engaging these people while also maintaining a respect for, social distancing and all that. What that ended up looking like is utilizing platforms like Zoom, utilizing platforms like Google Meets, to not only meet with our representatives and our legislators and, host things like virtual lobby days where we'd have hundreds of youth kind of come out, to meet with legislators and share their, opinions and concerns regarding different policy proposals. But also giving our organizers direct one-on-one support, meeting with them, constantly having an almost like open door policy where people can just reach out at any time and we'll get something scheduled with them and we'll be able to provide them with the specific resources that they need. And just making sure that everyone is also taking care of themselves in a, very challenging and unprecedented time.
What continues to energize or inspire you to keep going in your advocacy work?
Activism is a field where there is no instant gratification, where your success may not even come to fruition today or tomorrow or even in a year. It may take years or even a decade, and it's super easy to lose motivation. And at GR, we have a really strong support system that helps us keep motivated. We have our national directors, we have our ratifiers, we have our state directors, all these people that are built in to support you and to motivate you and to remind you of all the success we've had, no matter how long it's taking. We also like to look back at our past successes very frequently to contextualize everything we're doing and to remember why we're doing it. We're fighting for a better future, and it's not going to be easy, but looking back at our success helps us propel ourselves forward.
How can youth, especially BIPOC youth, find their voice in an activism space dominated by an older generation?
Organizing as a youth activist, as a BIPOC individual, can be very difficult at times. It is especially difficult when you're working in a space that is, predominated by an older generation. And the best way to go about this is by making connections and building your own network. And that can be with movement leaders who are not from your same background, who are not from your same generation, and also fellow youth activists that, share your experiences and your background and your identity. So being said, forming those connections and building that network will allow you to have a base group of support to support and uplift your work, and vice versa with the people in your community, and also build your presence in the space and build your presence in the movement.
What is the role of intersectionality in the Equal Rights Amendment movement?
Without intersectionality, the ERA movement simply just becomes an extension of white supremacy. Because if you're not fighting for BIPOC women, LGBT plus women, and other marginalized community, then you're only fighting for the white woman. So without inclusion, there's no movement at all.
Thanks, Yasmina and Blaine. It's so amazing to hear about the incredible, empowering work that you guys are doing regarding the Equal Rights Amendment. We're now going to hear from my organization, the Greater Good Initiative. The Greater Good Initiative is a youth-led policy think tank working to write and lobby nonpartisan, research-driven policy proposals to legislators at all levels of government. We'll be hearing from my co-founder, Tarina, in just a moment.
Young people are not the leaders of tomorrow.
We're the leaders of today.
Effective.
Dynamic.
Innovative.
Solution-oriented.
We are
the Greater Good Initiative.
The Greater Good Initiative is a youth-led policy think tank writing and lobbying research-driven policy proposals to legislators at all levels of government.
Our team consists of nearly 100 high school and college students from across the country working on GGI's policy and advocacy efforts.
We have 5 sectors: public health, education, economy, environment, and civil rights.
Our policy team crafts policy with empathy and care after doing deep research and meeting with stakeholders.
Policies are then kicked off to our advocacy team, who works with local, state, and federal legislators to help bring youth-centered ideas to the forefront.
We educate Gen Z on the importance of public policy in the policy-making process. You do not need to have a graduate degree to make an impact.
It is essential to include youth in the decision-making process and represent the voice of grassroots communities when we write and advocate our policy.
The Time for 9 Toolkit, a grassroots campaign endorsed by legislators and community organizations. 9 recommendations to address the disproportionate effects of COVID-19 on minority and socioeconomically disadvantaged communities.
Prisoner Health and Equity Standards, a series of guidelines and goals for state penitentiaries that will ensure safety, health, and fair compensation for all incarcerated peoples through water quality and commissary reform.
Broadband access for rural students, a policy that seeks to increase access to internet for rural students by eliminating barriers for localities by providing low-cost internet to their residents.
Vote for the Greater Good, a virtual campaign focused on empowering young people to vote, informing students on issues they care about, and teaching people how to register themselves and their families.
By equipping young people with the professional policy writing and advocacy skills, our team is working to bring new voices into the world of politics. We are.
We are.
We are.
The Greater Good Initiative. All right, Tarina, thank you so much for being with us today. The first question that I have for you is, what energizes or inspires you to keep going in your policy and advocacy work?
What energizes me and gives me hope is this idea that we as young people have an immense capacity for power and for change. Something I often think about is this term called radical imagination. And essentially, at its core, it means that nothing is too big for us to move towards. Nothing is too out of our reach. And that's what young people exemplify every day in organizing and activating and mobilizing and writing policy, in trying to build movements and build coalitions. All of us, every single one of us, has a unique story, has a unique why of the work that we're doing. And when all of those come together, even if we're advocating through different means, some through policy, some through grassroots mobilization, some through a blend of both, that's what gives us our power. And that's what allows us to challenge the institutions that exist. And that's what allows us to continue moving and shaking. And so when things get hard, when things might seem unattainable, that understanding and that power is what continues to revitalize that and my hope that we will build a better world for all of us.
What is the role of young people in the policymaking process?
Yeah, absolutely. Oftentimes we have this notion that you need a graduate degree or a master's to be able to be involved in the policymaking world, but that is not true. Young people have dynamic, fresh, innovative, new, sustainable ideas. And those ideas deserve to be at the forefront because those ideas center communities that need to be centered and amplify the voices that need to be amplified. And that is special. You know, we can learn how to write policy. We can learn how to write policy briefs and policy memos and budget analysis and all of that stuff. But what's innate in us as young people is that creativity. And more than that, our drive and desire to build something better. And as long as that desire is there, young people will always have a place in the policy-making process. And that's what we aim to prove and show and manifest at the Greater Good Initiative. We think about how do we take an idea that starts here and make sure that it's instituted here for all of us. And so that is a process and a journey that we continue to take. But never, and I mean never, underestimate the power of your idea and your drive to make change.
How do you amplify the intersectional voices of others through public policy?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that question. And I think it's incredibly vital that we continue asking ourselves exactly that. And so oftentimes Representative Ayanna Pressley will say that her love language is policy. And I think about that a lot because what I take it to mean is that policymaking is an active way to show communities that you care about cherishing and uplifting and amplifying and truly centering their voices and their perspectives and their identities and their experiences. And so kind of along with that, making sure that intersectionality, the cross-section of identities that inform each of our lived experiences, is also at the forefront when we're molding and crafting policies. And that means having meetings with community organizers and community organizations and just people who are affected by these policies, the stakeholders. Because in order to make sure that your policy is doing what it's aimed to do, it has to be sure to amplify and, like we've been talking about, center the perspectives and identities and experiences of those that the policy affects. And so kind of a sum and core of what all of that goes to say is that empathy in policy is one of the most vital things that we can think about because it has to come down to deep care and compassion and understanding and activation on the lived experiences of our fellow human beings. And that's what we seek to do as young people in this world of policymaking.
Thanks, Tarina. We're now going to hear from Not My Generation. Not My Generation is a nonprofit organization committed to localized, intersectional gun violence prevention advocacy for young adults. Take it away, guys.
Not My Generation is at its core an intersectional organization that seeks to elevate and empower community leaders to do the work that their communities need.
We call BS! We call BS!
Emma Gonzalez said it best, and it's been repeated over and over again. We are the mass shooting generation. And I think that sticks with so many people, young, middle-aged, old. When young people say that, it's absolutely terrifying.
And what do you think that's like for people who do hear gunshots every day?
When we talk about 40,000 people a year lose their lives due to gun violence, who are those people?
Things just make the news, like mass shootings, but we're not talking about everyday mass shootings in inner cities, We're not talking about the trauma that happens every day in inner cities. Where's that work for them being done?
Intersectionality is a word that is thrown around a lot in GVP work. But how many people are actually showing up intersectionally is not there at all.
I started to realize that there's a real need. There's a real need for localized intersectional advocacy for young adults. And so that's the nexus wherein Not My Generation was founded.
Our Summit for Young Adults Against Gun Violence is focused on creating strategy for meaningful gun violence prevention reform in our communities.
That what NMG does really, really well is not only centering folks who are survivors of gun violence, but then also making sure that we're really thinking about what communities are affected and how we can continue to include them in that conversation.
For those of us, people like me, who aren't people of color and who have white privilege and who don't understand certain types of things, the only way that we're going to understand is by having people who represent these different communities in the room at the table.
I want to make sure that it's not just directors making the choices, that it's people from all different communities across the US coming together to be at the table to talk about policy and advocacy and what that should look like.
We aren't just trying to add a voice to the conversation. We aren't just trying to create another organization to advocate for the same things. We're trying to create a new system of community organizing that makes what's already happening more accessible and more inclusive and more meaningful to the people that are already doing the work.
In my mind, I want Not My Generation to, in 50 years, not exist. I want March for Our Lives to not exist. I want every town in Giffords to not exist because we're solving these issues.
We believe in this mission, maybe even more than we believe in ourselves, because this organization and what we're working towards and the people we're working with are the reason that we are one day going to live in a country where there is no more gun violence.
All right, the first question I have for all of you is how, during the COVID-19 pandemic, has your advocacy and activism work changed with Not My Generation? What new platforms or mediums are you guys equipping to continue your efforts?
Hi, my name is Madeline Mardix, and I'm one of the communications directors for Not My Generation. Throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, advocacy has evolved to fit a more digital lifestyle and has expanded to adapt to the digital world that we're currently living in. Not My Generation specifically has adapted to that by expanding our digital programming. A couple examples of how we've done that are through a Facebook group called Not My Generation Organizing Community, giving activists the opportunity to share and grow and learn with each other in a collaborative online space. We have also hosted several online events via Zoom, such as phone banks, panel discussions, and more. Additionally, we are keeping up with and expanding our current social programming on platforms such as Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook.
What energizes or inspires you to keep going with your activism and your organizing?
I'll be honest, organizing's hard work. There are days when I'm down, I don't have the energy, and I want to quit. But I think there are two things that keep me in the fight. The first is community. There's a reason Margaret Mead said, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. When we're together, when we're looking at our peers and working off of each other, that provides me energy. And that's what we hope to do with our coalition model. And the second, quite frankly, is my own privilege. I was fortunate enough to be born into a family that's stable, that has never experienced gun violence, in a community that's never experienced gun violence. But when I look around at my peers and those who've seen it firsthand, I acknowledge that I'm fortunate. And so it's my responsibility to amplify the voices of those who don't have a seat at the table. And whether that's donating financially or giving my time voluntarily, that's also what keeps me in the fight.
How can the gun violence prevention space be more inclusive and truly intersectional?
Hello, my name is Elijah Nichols. I use he, him, his, and they, them pronouns. I'm the Policy and Advocacy Director for Not My Generation. And when I think about an intersectional gun violence prevention movement and what really comes to mind, I think it comes down to two things. I, of course, think it comes down to representation, because, of course, who knows best what is good for queer people, for low-income people, for Black and brown folks, other than themselves. But of course, I think it is systemic as well. We as gun violence prevention organizations, whether we're small organizations or we're larger organizations, need to be thinking about things like equitable and equal pay. We need to be thinking about valuing all time of labor and all forms of labor. We need to think about what ways in which applications, what ways in which policies may be inaccessible to our constituency, to our larger movement spaces, truly. So, of course, it comes down to personnel and systemic barriers, and we really need to, as a gun violence prevention movement, look at those things. Thank you so much.
How does Not My Generation's coalition model work to create grassroots change?
The coalition model is the best way of enacting intersectional, effective local change. Each community is specific in their needs and goals. So by uplifting and supporting local organizers, Not My Generation is ensuring that we are working towards the most community-specific solutions to gun violence. This model ensures that every branch of NMG, whether it be local, regional, or national, has an equal voice in deciding what we are doing on the ground. The coalition model encourages each individual on every level to take initiative in enacting change and lead their own projects with the support of other organizers.
Thank you to everyone from the Not My Generation team for telling us more about the inspiring and empowering work that your organization is doing. Lastly, we'll be hearing from Youth Over Guns. Youth Over Guns is a youth-led advocacy movement demanding that leaders and stakeholders invest time and resources into organizations working to reduce gun violence in communities of color. Take it away.
In addition to all the upheavals caused by the pandemic, social unrest, and heightened political turbulence, Amna Nawaz reports this summer is also shaping up to be a bloody one in our cities and neighborhoods.
From New York to California, Atlanta to Chicago, a July 4th weekend interrupted by gun violence, leaving dozens, including children, dead.
It's our job to make sure these kids grow up and live!
All right, thank you for joining us right now. I'm Eric Steltzer. We continue to cover the rise in gun violence. And local organizations, well, they're stepping up, trying to put a stop to this disturbing trend. Joining us right now, we have Luis Hernandez, the co-founder of Youth Over Guns. Luis, thanks for joining us this evening.
Thank you for having me, Eric.
Of course. You've been very involved with reducing violence and working with other youth. Can you talk a little bit about what you're doing in the community and how gun violence has personally affected you?
Post-Parkland shooting, myself and many other Black and brown youth organizers across New York City came together to really organize behind a call to action to stop the violence and ceasefire in our communities. But that eventually led into the founding and creation of Youth Over Guns, which is a youth-led organization specifically targeting Black and brown marginalized communities across the country and really building up youth leadership to really transform anger into advocacy.
Hi, my name is Andrea Alejandra Gonzalez, and I'm the Director of Operations at Youth Over Guns. Youth Over Guns, we're a grassroots youth-led organization that's dedicated to uplifting Black and brown lives in the gun violence prevention conversation, specifically those of Black and brown young people. We see the way that marginalized young people are, quite frankly, ignored from these conversations. Their experiences are ignored, their realities are ignored, and their solutions are also ignored. And so we're really focused on making sure that young people are getting the tools they need to become leaders of their own community.
What makes YOG really unique in the conversation about gun violence is that the people who work and collaborate with YOG aren't just outside observers advocating for change in communities they don't live in, but are people who have firsthand knowledge and experience on how destructive and volatile gun violence and policing can be to already marginalized communities.
We are able to not only advocate for policy that is often life-saving, but we are also making sure that we are on the ground in communities, making sure that we are passing along wisdom and knowledge to the next generation of leaders and advocates.
As we fight for Black lives, we can't forget Black children. Too often are Black children left out of the conversation. Too often are Black women left out of the conversation.
We're really focused on educating and just making workshops, making curriculum, and being with young people constantly is one of the best things I've ever done in my life.
We're going to get it because of people like you that push legislators like us.
I'm just really happy that I get to be part of this incredible moment in history where we are seeing young people take the stage in an amazing way.
All right, Andrea, the first question I have for you is, how has Youth Over Guns' advocacy changed because of COVID-19? What new platforms or mediums are you guys equipping?
Youth advocacy has changed a lot because of the pandemic. It has forced us to, not be with our community members that we love so dearly. But I think the beauty of youth advocacy is that we have always been able to create relationship and partnership across boundaries and borders, and that has only been strengthened in the pandemic by making sure that our information is accessible and able to just be used by anybody that wants to change their community.
What energizes or inspires you to continue your advocacy work?
Something that gives me hope and inspires me when things don't work out in our favor, when we work so hard and things don't change. I think it's just knowing that there are generations already working and educating themselves to pick up where we left off. And so knowing that white supremacy won't be dismantled within one generation, I know that I'm creating a blueprint along with the people that I love in my community to make sure the next generation has everything they need to take this movement to places where we could only dream of.
How can the gun violence prevention movement focus on cherishing and uplifting the voices of BIPOC youth rather than just tokenizing them?
The way that the gun violence prevention movement can actually cherish Black, Indigenous, and other people of color's experiences and lives and narratives is by allowing them to be part of the solution-making process. A lot of times, gun violence prevention movements only use Black and brown faces for donations or to fill out a grant. But, the way that we actually cherish these stories and these lives is by making sure they're involved in every single part of the liberation process. They are not to be spoken for, but Black and Indigenous young people are meant to be on the front lines, directing the movement and making sure that they are being included and are just being uplifted in every single space they enter.
What does a future free of gun violence look like to you?
A future free from gun violence looks like a community and a world where we have tackled and dismantled every system of violence that interacts with us today, because gun violence is the end result of all of these forms of violence. And so we need to make sure that we are dismantling and removing and making these systems obsolete. And then with that, we are creating safer communities. We are creating communities where gun violence is basically non-existent and where we are preventing harm so that we can guarantee that every single person can have a happy, healthy life.
Thank you again to these amazing leaders for telling us more about your organizations and the work that you all are doing in the activism and advocacy spaces. Before we continue, we wanted to give all of the leaders one more chance to let us know how people can get involved, both young people and people of older generations who want to support the work that we're doing with our organizations. All right, we're back with some of the amazing organizers and leaders of these 4 phenomenal youth organizations. And we want to know, how can people get involved with our organizations? How can young people get involved, as well as how can some of the older generations that want to support the work that we're doing get involved in supporting us? So we're going to start with Blaine from Generation Ratify.
Yeah, so to kind of get into it, something that we really believe in Generation Ratify is accessibility. The biggest part of a movement is making sure that we can engage as many people as we can from as many different walks of life and backgrounds as we can. As for youth, we have lots of opportunities in regards to individual organizing. We have opportunities to get involved in leadership and kind of take a role, an active role in your community and making those changes. Although we are an equal rights amendment organization that focuses primarily in ERA, a lot of change happens at the local level, at the grassroots level, and that's something that we really stress, and we really want to make sure that we give our local individual or chapter organizers the tools and the education and the empowerment and support that they need in order to do this. One of our, our little taglines is educate, empower, and elect. So that is essentially how we try to get all these youth involved. In regards to older generations, something that although youth movement is centered around youth and the upcoming generation, it's important to get that support from other generations that have different connections. We are still kind of growing in, we're still kind of coming up into the world, and we're still forming our networks and forming our connections. And it's important to have support from older generations that have these connections already and that are supportive of our vision and are ready to kind of pass the baton and let youth kind of make their voice heard and make that impact.
We here at the Greater Good Initiative, all we care about is imagination and creativity. Like Andrea said, that's one of the most humongous and important powers of young people. So for young people, if you want to get involved in the Greater Good Initiative, if you want to help us write policy that we can see pass at the local, state, and federal levels, join us as a fellow. So what fellows do here at the Greater Good Initiative is that they work with our directors in different policy sectors to help envision and write and advocate and strategize about how these policies are passed. How do we get it from young people's minds into legislatures? So join us as a fellow. You can find all of that information on how to apply on our website at thegreatergoodinitiative.com. So you can join us as a team member, but you can also help us as a supporter or a volunteer. And all of those opportunities will go up on our website as well as our social media. You can find us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook at The Greater Good Initiative. So connect with us there. And for older generations, it's really important to have intergenerational solidarity when we're trying to make this really imaginative change, this change that we're trying to have without borders. And as much solidarity as we can have, we are so grateful and profoundly grateful for. And so for older generations that might like to get involved, we are always looking for policy advisors and mentors and people who might be willing to talk over policies with us, help us strategize around it, and help us amplify the voices of young people who are really trying to make real, tangible, and genuine change in the institutions of power that we see today.
Yeah, so similar to my incredible contemporaries who just spoke, Not My Generation has a wide range of opportunities to get involved. For young folks out there, join our team as an organizer. Not My Generation is really focused around localized intersectional gun violence prevention advocacy. And what that means is that we need folks from all over the country, from wherever you are, whether you're in a city, whether you're in a suburb, whether you're in a rural area, to join our team and to help us think through what gun violence prevention, and general justice looks like in your community. We're really committed to understanding the specific needs of individual communities and then empowering our local organizers to go out and seek that change and build coalitions across lines of difference to actually facilitate moving forward in the change-making process. And so we need folks who are committed to their communities, folks who have a specific investment in preventing a specific type of gun violence, whether it be suicide or domestic violence or police violence. We need people who are invested in all of those pieces to join our team, to inform our organizing, and to help us be as effective as we can in the communities where we're located. So if you go onto our website, which is notmygenerationgvp.org, there's some information about local coalitions. Go ahead and check that out, see if there's a coalition in your area. If there is, we can help you get connected to them and jump right into the work. If we don't have a coalition in your area, join us as a coalition lead. Our coalition leads convene folks in their communities and then work to kind of power map what's happening in the community, who they need to talk to, who the movers and shakers are, what policies have really helped the community, what's hurt the community, understand all those pieces, and then start to bring the right people into the room to identify what change making in that community looks like. So we could always use local organizers as the bread and butter, heart and soul of our movement. We also have opportunities to get involved with our national team. We have national committees everywhere from program and strategy to fundraising and finance to policy and advocacy. So whatever your passion is, we can absolutely plug you in. There's forms to get involved on our website. You can reach out to me directly at execdirector@notmygenerationgvp.org. We're always happy to get you plugged in. And then also for folks who are older of different generations, we could really use your support too. First and foremost, of course, like was just mentioned, intergenerational solidarity is so vital. We know that we're young. We know that we have the imagination and creativity to imagine what a different kind of world looks like. We also know that we still need to learn from those of you who've been doing organizing in your communities, who've been doing the change making work, who've been setting the scene and paving the path for us to do this work too. And so we want to learn from you. We want to know what resources you think we should check out. We want to know what relationships you have so that we can learn from others. So, you know, if you're someone who has expertise in any of those areas, let us know. We want to learn from you. We want to work in solidarity. And then finally, I want to name something that can be a little bit uncomfortable, but in youth spaces, we talk about this a lot, which is that as a youth organizer, it can be kind of frustrating, quite frankly, when adults, you know, metaphorically pat us on the back and you know, talk about how we are the future and the, you know, the leaders of tomorrow. But as was said earlier, we are the leaders of today. And unfortunately, because this is the way that the world is organized, we need the resources to do the work. So if you are someone who has means and are able to, please donate and support our work. We, as young people, don't have access to a lot of financial resources. And it's so vital that for us to be able to continue doing our work, to make our organizing more accessible by paying our organizers, to be able to have grants and funds to support our local work, we need the money to be able to do it. So the most important thing you can do if you have the means is to give to each of our organizations and enable us to do the work.
So Youth Over Guns, we are really, like, we're focused on uplifting Black and Brown narratives in this conversation of gun violence prevention. And so if anyone is interested in continuing that work of uplifting and cherishing these lives and these stories, they should definitely join. We have a website called youthovergunsny.org where you can just get involved in any capacity, whether that's volunteering, joining the team, or even being part of our programming. We have a new fellowship that's called Anger to Advocacy, where we're trying to give the tools that we have to the next generation of leaders, because we're really focused on intergenerational building. Just like Catherine said, just like Tarina said, just like Blaine said, we are really, really focused on making sure that, you know, we are developing a blueprint for the next generation to pick up where we left off. We want to make sure that folks are on the ground and they are young people and that they're leading these conversations. And so that's really, really important to us. We want to make sure that we are getting everybody involved in this conversation and they have access to the tools that they need to be pillars of their community. And then for older folks, for elders, for folks that are just like are invested in young people, like Catherine said, you know, we don't need saviors. We don't need folks to, you know, I don't know, just like tell us like, oh, like, you know, I wasn't doing that when I was young. I don't know, silly things like that. Like, we don't need those kinds of compliments. What we need is you to be present and share your wisdom. You know, we are really, really passionate about making sure that our elders are in our spaces, telling us their stories, what they have learned. And, you know, financial donations are really important. You know, we want to make sure that kids can have a Metro card to go home at the end of the day, making sure they have something to eat at the end of a protest. And so that's really important to us. But also, if you have resources or skills, those are also really, really important. If you are, I don't know, a lawyer, you can make sure that we are being supported during a protest and someone gets jailed. Or, you know, if you're a great video maker, you can make, you know, really cool ads for us. And that expands and expands our network and shows our work to a lot more folks. And so, you know, financial donations aren't like the limit, but, you know, there's so many ways we can get involved. And, you know, whether that's time in our office with us, you know, hopefully after the pandemic is over, we can start inviting folks back into our spaces, but, you know, also leading workshops with us. And so there's an infinite amount of ways, because, you know, advocacy doesn't look like one way. We don't always have to be marching in the streets. We have to have anti-racist lawyers, we have to have anti-racist doctors, we need to have anti-racist community members as a whole. And so the same thing is happening in Youth Over Guns, where we need just every single community member dedicated to uplifting Black and Brown lives, specifically of Black and Brown young people. And so if you're interested in doing that, then like you can totally come by, and also we can DM us on Instagram, on Twitter, or just email us. All of our information is on our website.
Awesome. So amazing. Thank you all so much for sharing. It's so great to hear about 4 amazing youth-led organizations that are doing amazing work. And again, to everyone watching, one of the best ways that you can help us make the change that we want to make is by contributing financially. Obviously, this event is a great opportunity, but you also have all the information to all of our websites and other ways to donate in the future. So we thank you all so much for supporting the work that we're doing and being here today. I want to thank you on behalf of all 4 of our organizations so incredibly much for joining us this Tuesday evening to hear more about our organization's missions and the work that we're doing throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. Before we sign off for the evening, I do want to highlight one more time the donation button in the top right corner of the Give Butter event page. Financial contributions are the best way to support the work that we're doing and help us ensure that we can continue our advocacy, policy, and activism efforts long term. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful night.